أعزائي المشاهدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج الحد الأدنى. يسعدنا في هذه الحلقة أن نعيد تسليط الضوء مجددا على قضية شغلت بال المراقبين وكذلك المهتمين وبعض أركان المجتمع الدولي لمناقشة قضية الحريات الدينية في السودان. ظلت قضية تأخذ مكانها في السابق أثناء الحرب في جنوب السودان، ولكن بعد انفصال جنوب السودان تجددت مرة أخرى للحفاظ على حقوق الأقليات في السودان. وفي هذه الحلقة نسعد بأن نستضيف القس بنز، وهو كبير أساقفة ليدز، وهو عضو البرلمان البريطاني في مجلس اللوردات، وكذلك هو أيضا كبير مستشاري كبير أساقفة كانتربري. You are welcome to Sudan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
القس يزور السودان هذه الأيام، حيث شارك في ورشة الحريات الدينية التي استضافتها الخرطوم، والتي انعقدت بالتعاون بين لجنة الحريات الدينية ومجلس الكنائس السوداني. خاطبها القس في الخرطوم هنا بنز، وكذلك بعض الشركاء الدوليين منهم القائم بالأعمال الأمريكي، وكذلك ممثل لمنظمة سان جيديو الإيطالية في السودان، كما خاطبها أيضا ويليام دينغ من مجلس الكنائس السوداني. ناقشت هذه الورشة التي انعقدت في الخرطوم عدد من الأوراق، وفتحت عدد من القضايا للنقاش التفاعلي. ناقشت هذه الورشة ورقة حول الحريات الدينية في الدستور والقوانين السودانية من منظور قانوني وفقهي، قدمها البروفيسور علي من جامعة الخرطوم. وكذلك تم نقاش رؤية مجمع الفقه الإسلامي حول قضايا الحريات الدينية من منظور فقهي، قدمت أيضا. وكذلك هناك قدمت ورقة هامة حول قضايا العطلات المدرسية الخاصة بالمدارس المسيحية، وكذلك إجراءات ومعايير تشييد دور العبادة وحماية الكنائس في السودان. بهذه المقدمة نبدأ هذا الحوار مع القس بنز. كما ذكرنا هو كبير الأساقفة في الكنيسة الأنجليكانية في ليدز، عضو البرلمان البريطاني، ومستشار كبير أساقفة كانتربري. After this introduction, you are welcome again to our show, and we are really pleased to have you here.
Well, I'm very pleased to be in Sudan. It's my third visit, so I've grown to love the country. I don't love your mosquitoes, who have had a party on me in the last couple of days, but it's very good to be here.
We have a Sudanese proverb: whenever you drink from the water of the Nile, we will come again, and hope to see you fourth time again in Sudan.
I hope so.
I would like to ask first about a broad perspective regarding the relation between religion and politics. Nowadays, the world, from intellectual point of view, are divided. In a secular orientation point of view, that religion has nothing to do with the state, having in mind the historical experience in Europe before and the conflict between the church and the state. And other view, on the other hand, there is another view, think that, religion and politics are interlinked. You cannot talk politics without religion. You cannot talk about religion without politics.
Well, I think you can't understand the world if you don't understand religion, because religion often in the West is seen as a sort of add-on. So you have ordinary life and politics and economics and social movements and so on, and then religion somehow is over here and you bring that in at the end. And that's a misunderstanding of how religion operates, because if you are committed to a particular religious worldview or a community of practice, then that shapes the whole of the way you see life and the world. So if you don't understand religion, you can't understand why people and communities act in the way they do, why they choose the things they do. Now, I think on the distinction between religion and politics, there's a difference between saying, as I would, that religion and politics belong together, because politics is about people and power, and religion is about people.
Yes.
And they're living together. And whenever you have people together, you have questions of power. So religion must have something to say. As a Christian, I would say that the notion of power that we have in Christianity, although our history doesn't always show it very well, is that we don't use power to oppress people, but
Correct.
power is to be given away. Now, religion and politics belonging together in that sense, I think, is indisputable. But when power and politics try to use religion for its own ends or party ends, then you have a problem.
You don't feel any contradiction being a member of the House of Lords and being a bishop, a religious leader in your country?
No. And the reason is that I think firstly I would say if you were to create a parliament, you probably wouldn't create what we have in England now, with 26 bishops as part of the upper house, the House of Lords.
Yes.
But we've inherited it. And what the bishops bring is that we don't belong to a party, we're not a bloc, we can't be told what to say.
You don't have a parliamentary group as well?
No, and we can't be told how to vote. So regularly, bishops will vote in the same debate in different ways. Because our responsibility in the British Constitution, the British polity, is to serve the common good of the people, not primarily the interests of the church.
Yes.
But we do offer a voice in a secular space for the place of religion and religious communities. So I don't think there's a contradiction, even though it's a bit odd.
You have said before that, it is always dangerous when the process of mixing politics and religion together in a way to have a politicization of religion,
Mm-hmm.
or to use religion for political ends.
Mm.
I mean, you don't think there is a confusion because there is no fine line you can distinguish or separate when they meet together and they can,
Yeah.
differ together?
Yeah, it's a constant negotiation, and what you call the fine line will get transgressed. But a mature state, I think, is one, and a mature religion is one that recognizes the fragility of its own position, and therefore has the humility to negotiate that relationship all the time. So, to go back to the House of Lords, I could find myself arguing and voting for something that is not in my interest or the interests of the church, because we are looking at the wider interests of the whole country.
This will bring me to the question about integrating religious freedom in the agenda of the foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite clear in US foreign policy, UK foreign policy. I mean, religious freedom and human rights in general being an integral part of the foreign
Mm-hmm.
policy objectives. How do you think about that? And you don't think this is also using politics for religious objective, or using religion for political objectives?
Well, I think if it is, it's gone wrong. But I think the maintaining of a religious perspective on politics and international affairs can be helpful. So for
In what sense?
Well, in the sense that there's a former German Chancellor, Helmut Schmidt, who wrote a book when he was 91 called Out of Office. And one of the things he writes in this book is that when German young people come to him, he's dead now, but when they came to him and said they were interested in entering politics, he said to them, don't even think about it unless you speak at least 2 foreign languages to a competent level. Why? Because you can't understand your own culture unless you look through the lens of another culture, and to do that you need language. And I think when it comes to politics, to the negotiation between religion and power, then we need to be able to look from the outside at our own situation. And again, that's evidence of a mature society, a mature politics, that we can look through the eyes of outsiders to see what we look like and what we sound like. And that issues a corrective. So, you know, I can look at freedom of religion and human rights in Sudan from the outside, careful not to bring in my agenda, but to try and understand it first of all.
Correct.
But then Sudan might say, well, this is a gift that someone from outside is able to tell us what we look like. And I think that's where the international community can be seen, rather than as a problem, as a helpful gift in helping us to see more clearly and recalibrate. Because if I live in my bubble in England, I'll give you an example. Brexit is going on at the moment.
Yes.
Well, I do a lot of work in Germany, Switzerland, and so I read the German and the French media because I want to know what it looks like. Now, in Britain, it can look like we are saying we're really strong, we're powerful, we're going to leave the European Union and strike out on our own. And in Germany, they're going, you're mad. And so we need to
I have heard the same. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So with religion and freedom of religion and human rights, we should see it as a gift to look through the eyes of the outsider to see where we might improve, how we might change, and where we might be challenged.
But the problem here, I think, every religion has its own perspective regarding the worldview, or even looking into some international politics, or even social problems. My question will be, why all attempt and endeavors to revive the religion dialogue in order, you know, to prevent conflict, in order not to use politics for fanatic move or terrorism or something like that. Most of the attempt to reconcile the perspective of different religion, to have a peaceful world, or more to have an open dialogue between religion, almost failed. Why?
Well, I think there are very strong dialogues between, particularly between religious leaders, and on the ground, very often between particular religious communities. What's difficult is that if you look at the level of religious leaders around the world, they can sign documents, they can agree that we ought to live in peace. That doesn't always filter down to the grassroots, at ground level. If you were to say religion is a problem because it encourages fanatics, for example, so we ought to marginalize religion, I would say, well, you have to marginalize politics and politicians, because every human being has a worldview. There is no neutrality.
They're making mess all over the world.
Yeah, there is no neutrality. So no one can say, well, I occupy objectively neutral space, and everyone else is somewhere up the crazy scale. But I think at the root of your question is possibly an assumption that is widely held around the Western world, that religion is a problem. Whereas I would say religion could be the solution, or part of the solution. So how do politicians stop seeing religion as a problem with crazy people, and how does it embrace religion and say, we will be open to look through your eyes to see how the world looks to us?
From your perspective, there is a dialogue between civilization. This is the motto right now, and there is organization regarding that. In a way, I think if you could have a real dialogue directly between religion, rather than to have the umbrella of civilization, as if there is a Western civilization, Eastern civilization, Persian, Egyptian, or something like that. You don't think that if we have a direct dialogue between religion, might be better than to go for dialogue between civilization in a way?
Well, this is a matter of some debate. I remember when the United Nations and the Spanish government came up with an alliance of civilizations, and there were some religious bodies, including the Roman Catholic Church, that found it very difficult and wouldn't engage with that, and for a number of reasons. But I think there are many dialogues bilateral dialogues between religious bodies, and then the more multilateral conversations. So, for example, some of the global conferences on interreligious dialogue, where they're basically political. It's not about what you believe about God and the world and people. It's not over against what I believe. It's, okay, first question, do we agree on how we see God, the world, and us? Well, in some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. So the next question, how then do we live together? And there are some dialogues going on about, for example, between the Church of England and Jews, between Christians and Muslims, different types of Muslims. But there are also then the how do we live together questions, which are more political, which is we won't talk about God, we'll talk about we are different, so how do we enable our communities to negotiate that space in a conflicted world and a complicated world. It's not simple.
Sudanese people still remember the positive role that had been played by the International Council of Church during Addis Ababa Agreement 1972. And that will bring the perspective of the role of religion to solve conflict in Africa in general. And I think there are different successful stories regarding that. Do you think still religion is relevant for peacemaking and conflict resolution in general and Africa in particular?
Well, yes, but only if religious leaders and religious communities have the humility to know that you're there to serve our common humanity, not to defend your own interests. So if I want to defend the interests of Christians in conflicted places in the world, I can do so, but it's part of a wider picture. So I think there is a place for religion, but we're never going to solve everything. So I think what we look for is incremental improvements, bit by bit, the occasional victory, even though there may be occasional setbacks.
This is good, and this will bring me to another critical issue regarding the whenever some people, when they listen the quote-unquote religious freedom, they always think that it is a freedom for Christians, not all different religious followers. When you say that religious freedom, most of the people think, okay, this term coined to be for Christians, not for the religious freedom for Muslim or Jews or other followers. How can you defend that?
Because, well, I wouldn't defend that. Because it isn't just about Christians. This is about majority and minority, which is not about religion primarily. If you are the majority culture, or a majority religion in a place, then the question you may want to ask is, how do we make space for minorities? The minorities will say, we don't want you to make space, we want to be equal. And that's a different conversation. So in Sudan, for example, the Christians might be saying, we feel we are not equal, we are equal citizens, but we should be able to operate equally as people of religious commitment. But the majority isn't hearing that. I mean, I don't know if that's true, you could tell me. But that's how a minority will approach it. When you have genuine equality as citizens of a state, then that looks and feels different. And we face the same question in the United Kingdom, where there are Muslims who say, you know, we feel we don't belong or we are marginalised. But I would say we are actually equal. But I have to learn. There are a lot of Muslims where I live, but I have to learn to look through their eyes and hear through their ears and feel through their skin. And it may look different from the perspective of the minority.
Thank you very much for that. We'll go for a short break and come back. أعزائي المشاهدين فاصل قصير ثم نعود فابقوا معنا. مرحبا بكم أعزائي المشاهدين مرة أخرى في برنامج الحد الأدنى، ونحن نواصل الحوار مع القس نيك بينز عضو مجلس اللوردات البريطاني، وكذلك كبير مستشاري كبير أساقفة كانتربري، وهو أيضا كبير أساقفة الكنيسة الإنجليكانية في ليدز. في الجزء الأول من الحوار ناقشنا قضية الحريات الدينية وقضية الحوار بين الحضارات ودور الدين في السياسة، واستمعنا إلى إجابات مختلفة. لكن في هذا الجزء الثاني نواصل الحوار حول قضايا الحريات الدينية المرتبطة بالسودان. Bishop, welcome back again for the second part of our discussion. And I will start with Sudan. And I will be a bit candid and frank in this question. Most of the politicians and intellectual Sudanese think that the separation of South Sudan 2011 was mainly driven by Christian right in the West pushing for the separation of South Sudan. And they put it in a context that religion has been used in a negative way to separate part of Sudan because they think that protection of the Christian is very important than to keep the country united, or to have a Christian independent state rather than to have a formula for peaceful coexistence between Muslim and Christian. In a way, the conclusion of this question is that separation of South Sudan was mainly driven by Christian motivation and Christian movement in the West, in Sudan. It might be wrong, it might be right, but it is a question anyway.
I would find it difficult to comment because I'd need to be more clear about who was driving it from the West. I think it's quite clear that there were serious questions of religious freedom there, but what were the political drivers towards the separation? I think it's much more complex. I mean, I think it's a matter for Sudan and South Sudan. I'd have to say it wasn't terribly successful given what's happened, but you would have to go back to asking, well, if there were political drivers outside of Sudan driving for the separation, did they have a case? You know, what was the evidence that enabled them then to make their case that there ought to be a independence or separation? Was it because Christians felt that they were second-class citizens, they were marginalised? Whatever the outcome, ultimately, you would have to identify what were the drivers, what were the factors that outsiders were able to focus on to say that's a problem. And I think that's much more complicated than simply Christians.
It is true, but in a way, I mean, I'm asking about the religious perspective.
Yeah.
Whenever people fail to have a formula for coexistence or to preserve the right, because this is civil struggle, political struggle, to have all citizens to have equal rights together. It is a process, definitely, and to have, but the nation state in Africa in general, very fragile in terms of ethnicity, tribalism, and also religious diversity in a way. But do you think that religious perspective support or not supporting that religious minority have their own state anywhere in the world?
I think this is where we go back to an earlier conversation about politics and religion. And a religious state is a difficult concept, I think, because that is the procurement of religion by power, or of power by religion for its own ends. Part of the struggle for Christians, I think, is that Christian theology says, you know, our symbol is a cross. It's about giving up power. It's being subject to what the world can throw at us and not throwing it back. That's what Jesus was about. And when Christians try to use power to accumulate power for their own interests, then we have a problem. But politics is complicated, as you know.
Correct. Would like to welcome you back for the third time in Sudan. Why you are here in Sudan this time?
Well, I'm the bishop of probably the largest diocese in the Church of England, the Diocese of Leeds. And in 2014, it was made up out of 3 small dioceses that were dissolved, and one of them was Bradford. And I was the Bishop of Bradford for 3 years before that. And for 40 years, there's been a link between the Church of England in the Diocese of Bradford and the Episcopal Church in Sudan. Interestingly, not in the south, just in what was North Sudan. And therefore, we have a very close relationship. So we have clergy and lay people who come over here to do what we talked about before.
Yes.
To be able to share the life of Christians here, but also to see what's happening, to meet Muslims as well, and to learn about Sudanese life. And we bring over Sudanese to England as well, so they can look through our eyes, and they're always cold when they come to England.
You are right. I mean, we'd like to talk about the religious freedom and coexistence in Sudan. You know, after the separation of South Sudan, because the majority were Christian right now, the statistic might show that Christians in Sudan like 3% right now, maybe more or less, but this is just roughly the figure. And as we have discussed before, that the Sudanese constitution has a very sound Bill of Rights, that, you know, citizenship is a base for duties and rights everywhere. But definitely in every society there is problem here and there. How do you perceive religious freedom in Sudan? There are some difficulties definitely here and there, but do you think there is a common interest for the people that to discuss and go ahead based on your participation on the workshop yesterday?
Well, yes. I mean, I was going to say I've come over here particularly this time for the workshop yesterday on religious freedom, and it was a very stimulating conversation, and out of it came a number of recommendations. I think the key thing I would say is that a constitution, I've read many national constitutions, and they all say we guarantee religious freedom and human rights. But then what you sometimes see is that the legal framework doesn't support, in some areas, what the Constitution aspires to. So one of the things that came out yesterday was, should there be a commission set up for legal reform or constitutional reform that looks to make sure, from the outside, if you like, that law, which governs practice,
yes,
and brings social order, that law actually delivers what the Constitution aspires to.
And should be harmonized.
Should be, yeah, so there's no distinction
Conformity,
between it.
yeah.
Because what I was saying at the workshop was that the lived reality for people is often different from what we think the law should allow and what the Constitution guarantees. So if the Constitution says there is religious freedom and everybody is equal because citizenship is at the heart of everything, and then there are particular laws that discriminate against particularly religious minorities, then they are going to say, and that law is applied, they are going to say, well, how does this work if the law is not delivering what the Constitution says? And Sudan isn't the only country in the world that has to keep working at this. You never arrive at the solution. You have to keep negotiating it.
But honestly, this is maybe the same argument that people have been listening for the last 30 years, even before the separation of South Sudan. But let's talk exactly about maybe two examples,
yeah.
As has been discussed in the workshop. For example, the school calendar.
Yeah.
For the last maybe many decades, definitely, the holiday for Christians Sundays here.
Yeah.
But the state government would like to regulate that, to have a unified school calendar, and this is all over the world. I think in UK itself, there is no holiday at the weekends for Muslim or for for Jews or for the Christian, but there is a national school calendar for everybody over there. But definitely there are different voices that they would like to have this. How can we reconcile these differences for a country that would like to have a national school calendar for everybody, and some religious schools would like to have their own weekends, holidays, separate from that? I mean, how can we reconcile this?
Well, I keep using the word negotiation because there isn't a single solution that works for absolutely everybody. So how do we serve the common good as well as possible? In England, space is made for religious holidays, for example. And in my own office, I have a Jewish secretary. And on the Jewish holidays, I insist that she has that day off and that she doesn't take it as from her holiday allocation.
Yeah.
Because it's important.
Correct.
And I think she was surprised when I
you offer
said
that.
And I think in schools it's the same. We make provisions. Some, for example, Muslim schools, I mean, I could name one or two, they will not work on Friday, but they will do Saturday. So there is provision, again, within our settlement, for flexibility within it. And I think in relation to that particular ruling, which I think was in Khartoum State,
It's only Khartoum State.
Why create an unnecessary problem at that particular time, when that becomes one of the touchstones for the international community, looking at Sudan and saying, well, is that a restriction of religious freedom? And then it becomes a human rights issue, and then it becomes a political issue.
But the state authority think this is would like to have a unified national school calendar for everybody to follow, and to have a school order in that. I mean, different perspective, definitely.
Yeah.
But you say that negotiation is very important. In a way, I listen to different argument. One of them that the majority of the students in this Christian school are Muslim themselves.
Mhm.
So the family of the Muslim, you know, would
Yeah.
like also to have the family,
Yeah.
to have their weekends together. This is one of the arguments,
Yeah.
for example. But anyway, negotiation is the only way for
Well,
this.
I think it has to be, but if a negotiation assumes that you have all the parties in the room,
Correct.
and you know, it's not for me to advise the state government of Khartoum, but you need the Christians in the room if you're going to
Correct.
negotiate something that will have an impact on the Christian or the Jewish community, and you want to bring them alongside. So you look for the compromises where you can get the best for everyone. But you can't do that by excluding them from the conversation.
Definitely. The second example I would like to discuss about the churches.
Mm-hmm.
2 points. One, I mean, the total number of the churches in Sudan, almost 900. This is what I heard, but
Okay.
I don't have any confirmation for that. But the same number of churches remain the same even after the separation of South Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 97% of the Christian moved to South Sudan,
Mm-hmm.
but the same number of churches remain
Mm-hmm.
here. Yesterday, we have listened to the Urban Planning Authority
Mm-hmm.
for regulation. They see that we deal equally with mosque, demolish mosque and churches together. You know, if they are not part of the urban planning system, just to regulate that. But it becomes like a problem because Christians everywhere think that, you know, there is demolition of churches. International community pick that as an evidence for, you know, oppressing the Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same allegation, you know, that have been circulated before, even during South Sudan. How can we deal with that problem in a negotiation manner and to respect different perspectives on that?
Well, I think there's an underlying question there about how Christian churches organise. I mean, in the same way, we find it quite, in the United Kingdom, quite interesting that suddenly a mosque pops up, and what you thought was a shop on the corner of the road is now a mosque. And then we say, well, to whom does that belong? Well, it doesn't belong to anyone. It's just someone decided to turn it into a mosque. And it's very difficult to communicate very often because there's no organisation of mosques. But we make space for that. You have to. Now, I think the question for churches is the population of Christians may have gone down, but the way you belong to a church goes deeper than simply,
Correct.
well, there used to be 100 of us and now there are 20. We are committed to these people in
It's
this
not about
place.
number.
It's not
It's
about
about
numbers.
about
Yeah.
rights.
Well, it's about rights and obligations. Now, I think the danger is that what is perceived as a religious freedom issue receives a political administrative response, which is, well, you built it in the wrong place. And I think at heart, some of this has to do with communication and PR. For example, when I was here last with the Archbishop of Canterbury in 2016 or 17, there was a church that was scheduled to be demolished that had been built before some of the planning regulations came in. And we simply said, well, why don't you legitimise it and show some flexibility in that case in order to demonstrate, which can easily be done, and it then demonstrates to the outside world as well that is watching that we understand this, there is flexibility. And when we also said, we understand, or you keep saying that mosques are being demolished, can you show us one? They weren't able to show us one.
There are 13 mosque demolition in the state of Khartoum.
And then, yes, but you can see the problem. When they can't tell us, which was 2 years ago, then the suspicion grows that this is not a level playing field.
But I mean, the perspective that, I mean, nobody against the regulation of urban planning, you know, in every city in the world, you know, to have, you know, this. Because this will bring the question of compensation. I have heard it many times before.
Yeah.
Whenever you diminish church or mosque, you have to compensate the people
Yeah.
for it. But you don't think that, you know, the number of worshippers and churchgoers and the statistics of the population in every district and in every municipality has some relation whether to be a mosque or a church or synagogue or something like that as well.
Well, of course it has. It has an impact. You know, it's a factor, but it's only one factor. And I think my perspective from the outside, and I may be completely wrong, is that if a particular authority within Khartoum state was looking at its urban planning and was looking at the land registration or the development of a particular area, and there's a church in the wrong place, then why not get the bishop or the archbishop or the church involved, bring them in early and say, how do we resolve this question, rather than simply saying we're going to demolish your church and one day it gets demolished. So why not seek a solution rather than simply present a problem that then is compounded by action?
I have heard another argument, I don't know whether it's wrong or right, that the number of churches is more than the Christian in this country.
Well, I think that would be very surprising, because if you have, I don't know what the statistics are, but if you have 1 million Christians, you're not going to have 1 million church buildings.
But I mean that, in a way, that means that they're enough for the people, because I have heard, I'm not sure about it, that I mean the number of churches that exist in Khartoum state right now is enough to accommodate the worshippers of Christians in Khartoum,
but
for example.
Enough according to which criteria?
This is the right question.
Simply numbers. I mean, you see, if you're looking at religious freedom, there's an issue that goes well beyond numbers, which is if you're Muslim, can you register land for a mosque more easily than you can if you're a Christian? If there was a new community had developed because of migration or cross migration, and there are a group of Christians who say, we would like to worship together here rather than walk 3 miles to somewhere else.
Correct, absolutely.
Why can't we simply set up a church in a house or maybe have a building later? But why can't we register this? Then I would say it's in everybody's interests to ask, well, how do we enable this to happen in an orderly way?
Another question regarding this is about, is a question, Christians in Sudan are Sudanese citizens. They have to fight for their all rights in the constitution and laws. But in a way, that international community became like a protector for them, rather than to help them get their rights within the system of the state. They're so dependent on the international community support every time, rather than to give them the ability and the help, the assistance, you know, to fight for their own rights in the constitution. And
why do you think that is? Why do you think that situation has arisen?
I'm asking the question.
So, well, I'm asking the question back because I can't pretend to understand everything about the Sudanese situation.
Honestly, the problem right now, most of the Sudanese think that some in the international community always, you know, play the role of protecting the Christian minority in Sudan, rather than to help them get their own rights within the system itself.
So why am I here? You know, I'm not here as someone from outside to interfere.
No. This is not the question.
Precisely because you might at one stage want to protect a community in order to give it the confidence to do what you're describing, which is about growing in confidence and maturity.
It's a good answer for that, definitely.
And if the state creates the space for drawing Christians into the negotiations ahead of the time as equal citizens, and not just we will generously carve out a bit of space here for you, then that creates a different conversation, a different relationship. It creates trust and it builds confidence. And then you get, I think, what you're asking for, which is that the international community shouldn't have to be looking in order to protect. But if you've got a minority that feels it's not being given its rights, then inevitably that's going to be looked at in the same way as it is in
Unfortunately,
England.
we're running out of time, but I will give you 30 seconds to give your final message. I mean, to in perspective of religious coexistence, peaceful coexistence, how can Sudanese people, Christians, Muslims, other minorities, live together?
I would use the words of Jesus: love your neighbour as yourself. Put the interests of your neighbour ahead of your own sometimes, and see what the world looks like through their eyes. And if we build strong relationships from the ground, then you bring change throughout. But it's a process, it's not an event.
This is a wonderful conclusion to our discussion. Thank you very much for your time and your patience and your openness and candid discussion to have all this question together.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. أعزائي المشاهدين، للأسف كنا نريد أن نستمر في هذا الحوار الذي نريده كاشفا واضحا حول قضايا الحريات الدينية، ونشكر البيشوب نيك بينز على صراحته وعلى صبره في الإجابة على هذه الأسئلة التي قدرنا أن تكون مهمة لتوسيع مساحة الفهم بين قضايا الحريات الدينية وحقوق الأقليات غير المسلمة داخل السودان. لكم الشكر والتقدير على حسن المتابعة والمشاهدة. تقبلوا تحيات خالد موسى وتحيات الفريق العامل، وإلى اللقاء في حلقة أخرى. Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoy it. Thank you.